All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Yeah, we've got a quorum. All righty. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our morning strategic planning session. We'll go ahead and just have the clerk call us. I'll call us to order, but clerk call the roll. Oh, hello. You're with us today. And then we'll move into non-consent towing.
Bajan.
Oh, we still have.
Here.
Clegg. Halliburton.
Just any of those. Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Willett. Wooding.
Here.
4 present, 2 absent.
Thanks. And Jamie is here not to call roll or be clerk, but to talk about non-consent towing. Sorry about that. All right, jump on in.
All right, Madam Mayor, council members, thanks for having me here today to talk about non-consent towing. Let's see if we can get the presentation up on the screen. Excellent. So today I'm here to talk about non-consent towing and want to provide some background and history about non-consent towing, talk about some of the current challenges that we've had, talk about stakeholder feedback that we've received thus far and what we're hoping to do in the future, talk about potential amendments, a few of them you can see here, as well as amendments to the potential fee structure, and seek your direction and feedback on how to move forward with an ordinance and any changes that may come from this. So with regards to the background, in 2008, the original ordinance was developed. At that time, it was created by the Boise Police Department, the Abandoned Vehicle Unit, and with stakeholder input. A part of that ordinance, as it was drafted, was to include licensing, and the clerk's office was engaged to do the licensing for the actual businesses for non-consent towing. As we continued to license, as we worked through the licensing process, it was a little bit inconsistent with how we managed other licensing types. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those challenges as we move forward. But because of that, in 2012, BPD and the clerk's office worked together to help eliminate some of the duplication that we were seeing between the police department and the licensing agent in the clerk's office, and really created a one-stop shop with the city clerk's office being the lead in the licensing role. That helped streamline things for the industry as well as ourselves internally. In 2013, clear through 2015, we looked at some different approaches on how we could maybe amend the non-consent towing ordinance or look at ways to manage it. We began with an ordinance rewrite, and we worked with stakeholders at that time to do that rewrite. However, in the alternative, we also looked at establishing an RFP to have a single or multiple service provider without having a licensing mechanism, but rather look at providing that service through RFP. At the end of the day, neither one of those methods were instituted at that time, and it was kind of set aside as one of the projects that the city was working on. Which brings us to today, when we were engaged more recently in 21-22 by the Idaho Towing Association and asked to really reassess the ordinance. Many of those individuals were involved in the 2013 to 2015 process, and again have come back asking us to take a look at some of the inconsistencies that they see, some of the safety concerns that they see, and we'll walk through those here shortly. But probably at the forefront of that is we regulate the fees that they are able to charge for their towing services for non-consent tows. With inflation and rising gas prices, they are concerned, and probably rightfully so, as they're not able to actually recover their costs based on that structure that has not been addressed since 2008. As I mentioned, some of the current challenges that we see is really the inconsistency with how we license other industries, the safety standards that are in place, and particularly with regards to those that are also driving services. So like taxis, non-commercial vehicles, et cetera. You can see some of those inconsistencies listed here and some of those safety concerns, and in the proposed recommendations for moving forward, I'll address these a little bit more specifically. In addition, there are enforcement inconsistencies that really cause some difficulties for us in regulating the tow industry for non-consent tows. Challenges that make it hard for us to enforce some of those regulations because some of those requirements and authority are given to police. Some of the authority is given to our code compliance office. Tyler Johnson is here and can talk more specifically about that if you have any questions, but it really causes challenges when we're trying to deal, although with few, but those bad actors that we have within the industry. So I wanted to touch a little bit about stakeholder outreach and what we have done thus far. Back in the 2013 to 2015 timeline, we did work with contractors that we have for towing services to go through the ordinance and to really take a look at what the best practices were that they had seen throughout the industry and their work within the industry. We currently contract, with service providers for towing in parks, for scofflaw tows, and for abandoned vehicle tows. So those are areas that we worked with those individuals to make sure that we understood what their needs and concerns were. We also had a large stakeholder meeting, both internal and external stakeholders. There were probably about 40 of us in the room at the time, and we got a lot of really good feedback and had a lot of good engagement during those discussions. As I mentioned, since then, the Idaho Towing Association has reached out to us. We did have them review our existing ordinance and have their feedback based on an initial review of what we currently have in place. And we will present those here shortly in the presentation and what they're hoping to achieve. However, as we move forward, based on your direction today, we will have to reach back out to the industry. We want to gain more information from them. We want to talk to other agencies that also regulate non-consent towing services and really make sure that we are doing that outreach and getting their feedback because they are certainly the experts within the industry. So when we take a look at what we want to achieve, we're really looking at licensing requirements, again, making sure we're consistent, making sure that we have safety requirements in place. And I also want to review the industry recommendations in which the city is very much, I believe, in alignment with from the staff perspective and are looking for your direction from the policy perspective as well. So when we focus on these, the licensing, safety, and consistency, we are really in agreement with a lot of the goals that were proposed from 2013 to 2015 as a staff to really align the regulation of non-consent towing businesses with other driving businesses licensed by the city, as I mentioned, like taxis, non-commercial vehicles, and really to create a more rigorous safety measure and for the protection of our community by doing such. So when we look at how we license other driving businesses within the city, we license the business itself, which is what we currently do with non-consent towing, but we also license the individual vehicles and we also license the individual drivers. We do that for a variety of reasons, primarily from the safety aspect. As you can see here from the vehicle standpoint, we would, if we license, have an initial and annual safety inspections of those vehicles. Right now, the way the code is written, inspections of those vehicles don't occur until 90 days after a vehicle is on the road. So it could be on the road in a non-safe working condition for up to 90 days. So again, to be consistent with taxis, commercial vehicles, limos, we do those inspections up front to ensure whatever is on the road is actually in safe and in good working condition. We would have standard safety inspections that would be potentially accepted across agencies because these towing drivers are required to be licensed at the county level and at the state level. So it would make sense that we have consistent and not duplicative inspection services or standards across all of our agencies. We also want to verify the class of trucks. So making sure that if it is a light duty truck, they're only hauling things that are appropriate for that type of light duty vehicle and not overloading those vehicles. Again, standardization in those inspections. We want to have certified and trained inspection professionals that are very consistent with what the industry needs, not somebody who might just be a general mechanic who may not know what some of the specifics are for the tow industry and the type of equipment that they use. Also consistent with licensing for out of service decals. So if there is a safety challenge, we can put that vehicle out of service. It's quickly identifiable if they show up at the scene of an accident, those types of things. Again, going back to that safety aspect and consistency with those other driving businesses. Additionally, we would like to license drivers. The code currently has us do a background check on all drivers. However, they are not licensed. So if there is somebody who is not acting with appropriate conduct or they're doing things unsafely, we don't have the ability to pull a license because there isn't one, right? So we can go back to that business and ask to hold that business accountable, but that driver who has an ID could go someplace else potentially and work because they passed the background check. Again, it's not a license that we have any accountability to. So we would like to be able to do that as well. Other staff recommendations for potential policy changes would be to amend the code format. You often hear me here talking about 31A, which is our general business licensing regulation. This code section was never changed to be in the same format as the other code sections and to refer to that higher general licensing standard. So for example, the appeal process for anybody who has an appeal for a non-consent tow driving license, they go through a completely separate appeal process than any other license type that we have. And that does cause some challenges. So we'd like to make sure that that is something that is standard, along with other requirements for driving business licenses. Rather than having the specifics embedded within this code, we'd like to refer back, like we do with our other code sections, to what we call our 31A section. We'd also like to standardize the application process as well as our license fee requirements, because the fees for non-consent towing are managed differently than any other fees that we have. We've been working with police, and we do see challenges with our rotation list that is used and provided to our dispatch service. And we'd like to develop requirements within our code section potentially to address some of the challenges that we are seeing there. We would also like to create a professional code of conduct, because many of the complaints that we get address the code of conduct and how these professionals are acting and interacting with the public and the concerns surrounding that, but we really don't have any teeth in how we can regulate that. The industry recommendations, many were in alignment with the ones that we already discussed that are also from staff. But as we look at some of the specific ones that they had, we look at the increased towing fees. As I mentioned, those fees that they can charge for doing a non-consent tow are embedded within the code and have not been changed since 2008. So as they are looking at inflation costs, as they are looking at obviously staffing costs, they're looking at the gas prices, those fees that we created in 2008 aren't necessarily keeping up with the costs for them to do business. So wanting to address what those look like. Also, annual full DOT inspections is a recommendation from them. So as we talk about inspections, that's something that we would like to look at. They ask us to clarify various definitions in the code, and you can see some examples of the specifics that they had there. Also, VIN inspections. They would like to see free VIN inspections for vehicles that are left on their lots, and to have specific staff that are designated and more available to come out and do those inspections for them. They would like to address the release of vehicles and industry reimbursement for the release of vehicles. So for example, if they show up on site based on a city request, somebody comes out and says, please don't tow my vehicle. We ask them to stand down. If they have not hooked up to that vehicle, they're asked to walk away, and they're asking for reimbursement for them to do that initial response to cover some of their costs. Right now, if they hook up to a vehicle and are asked to release it, there is a $50 release fee. But if they have not hooked up to the vehicle yet, they are not getting reimbursed for responding. Also, they are asking for more regular communication and standard contacts with the city as well. And I think that that is something that we always aim to do, but can always do better at, is having those ongoing conversations with various industries. I did want to pull out and specifically talk to the fee structure options that we have. So what we could do is look at the existing fees that are within code, adjust those, and potentially add an administrative fee to cover those additional costs for processing the vehicles. We could look at a flat fee model. We could look at providing a sliding range for things such as mileage fees, or we could have a combination of all of those things. So I think these are just the initial thoughts that have come from the industry, initial thoughts that have come from staff. We would like to go back out, do additional research, look at how other agencies such as Ada County and the state of Idaho are charging fees, look at other industry best practices, but these are some initial thoughts that came from the industry as well as staff. So really, when we talk about next steps, certainly we are here today to look to you to see your policy direction. Are we, based on the recommendations from the industry and staff, headed in the right direction? Are there other things that you would like to see, or would you like to see us go in a different direction than what we have proposed? Regardless of the direction, unless it is to stand down from this project at this time, we would obviously do additional stakeholder meetings. We would include some outside agencies as well. Just like anything else, if there's the adoption of fees or change in fees, we would potentially need to do a public hearing for that and come back to you at a further or future work session to address some of these potential changes. So with that, stand for questions and seek council direction on how to move forward with this ordinance.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, I think Elaine was first, actually.
Thank you. So I appreciate this. I'm glad that we're finally getting here. 2008 is way too long to go without reviewing a fee structure. So at very least, we have to do that. In addition to the list you mentioned, I like the list that you mentioned. One is a question about one of the things on there. You want to standardize the licensing and inspection. Have you talked to Ada County yet? I know that they have a licensing and inspection. I think once a year they do something that everybody can come if they'd like. Have we talked to them yet about participating in that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, I have been in discussions over the last year or two with Ada County, looking at that, having one inspection process also for the state of Idaho as well, because they do something that is similar. The last I spoke to Ada County, they were looking at reviewing their code and making some of those changes, and that had been just placed on hold temporarily. So I need to reach back out to them based on your direction. But yes, we would like to do that. And the county is very interested in having a standard process as well.
Great. I would like to see us adopt the same standard if we can. Similarly, some of the other cities around the valley, especially the bigger ones. I know Meridian has been looking at theirs, for instance. So if you could add that to the list, I appreciate it. One of the things I've heard from the industry is that some companies are licensing separate trucks as separate LLCs, and in doing that, then they get on the list for being called for non-consent towing more often than they would if they were just one business license. Have we talked about addressing that in any way?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, I took a look at the list of non-consent tow companies that we have, and out of all of the companies that we have, we don't have one owner that has multiple companies. So I don't know that that in fact is true from the city standpoint, but we could address that within any code changes. We do that with our taxi industry to make sure that they are not creating different businesses. So again, in being consistent with how we manage such driver's licenses, we could address that in the ordinance to make sure that that isn't occurring.
Two more, if I could. One is that sometimes there are difficult tows. Say a car goes off Bogus Basin Road and somebody has to get it. Today, those tows are considered whatever fee structure there is, and there's no administrative fee for the difficulty. Have we looked at, as we look at fees, addressing that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, I think there are multiple ways that we could address that based on the weight of the truck. We could have variable fees for those difficult tows. We could have additional fees that might be able to be in place for that. Also, right now, we do have a labor fee by hour. So that sometimes addresses some of those things because it would take you longer to deal with potentially a rollover. So you can charge hourly for that. So I think there's multiple ways that we could address that. And again, we would want to look at the other local agencies, how they potentially manage that and work with the industry. But I think it's a great point to recognize that there are those more difficult tows that cost the industry more money to manage.
Thank you. And last question, and then a suggestion. When we do non-consent tows, now we allow so what you're telling me is we allow them, if they've already hooked up, to unhook and not tow the vehicle if the owner arrives. And in that case, they can charge a $50 fee. But if they haven't hooked up yet, but they're there, they're not able to charge a fee. I just want to make sure I was understanding that correctly.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, that is correct.
And so the fix would be that we'd also have an administrative fee just for showing up. Okay, perfect. And then finally, my suggestion, as we amend this code, I'd like to see at taking a look at taking the fees out of the code and putting them into a fee schedule like we do with our other fees, so that we review them once a year at budget and see if they need changed.
All right, I think it's my turn. Jamie, first of all, I just cannot even fathom the amount of knowledge about licensing and code and like business licenses and everything that you keep in your head. Like every time you come to us, I'm like, oh, she knows about this much about that thing too, and this many other things. And I just think that that's really extraordinary. Anyway, that aside, I have a couple of questions. So when you say you're a towing company, you need to get your vehicle inspected. Where does that currently happen within the city of Boise?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, currently it is required to be a Rec Master certified professional. However, in doing some research, there's some questions about what those requirements are. And we've been working with our fleet department to take a look at that. Currently, I think the only Rec Master certified individual that I am aware of is down in Mountain Home. So that causes some challenges. We have talked about our own staff being certified. But again, I think we need to look at what is that certification? What does that mean? And is there a more appropriate or just as reasonable safety-wise inspections that can be done by somebody else? And what would that training look like?
So if somebody goes to Mountain Home apparently and gets Rec Master certified, does that certification apply to every jurisdiction? So the city, the county, the state?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, that's a great question. That is the requirement in our code. I have not broached that question with the other agencies, but would be a great question to ask.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have, kind of a consistent certification across everyone so that people only have to do it one time, whether that's at the city shop or, wherever it might be. I think more simple and consistent is better. And I have a question about the administrative fee. So if I park and I'm not saying that this is an actual scenario that has happened to me, by the way. If I park in an illegal spot in the park, I walk up and they're not yet hooked onto my car, and so they leave. The administrative fee, is that charged to the city? Is that charged to me? Like how would that work under a new scenario?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, great question. I think what we typically do is it's only an officer that can tell the tow company to stand down. And so then that question would be, is that paid for by the city because we called for that? Or is that something that the individual would have to pay? Right now, if it is somebody that is hooked up, the individual has to pay that $50. So great question. I don't know that we have gotten down into the weeds of that yet, but certainly something that we will want to look at and address.
Yeah, I think, and this is just, my off the cuff idea, but if somebody's parked illegally, I'm assuming that they would receive a parking ticket kind of regardless. If there was a way to kind of encompass that within a parking citation, I think that could be a good way to recover that to the city if we're paying an administrative fee out to towing companies. And I think that, like, more generally, philosophically, I understand the need for non-consent towing. I think that sometimes it feels like, and yes, I have had my vehicle towed before, it feels like sometimes they can be a little bit predatory on fees. If you, like, say my car gets towed at 8 o'clock, their yard closes at 8 o'clock. So I can't get my car until the next day. They've charged me an extra fee on top of the fee for towing. And so those things sometimes kind of add up for the person who has been towed. And so I would say if there's any way that we can build some of those things and build some fairness in for the consumer, I think that would be really great and really much kinder to our citizens than what sometimes currently happens. I've not been towed for a long time. I've tried to be compliant in all of my parking situations, but I was in my 20s once. So that's it. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Jamie, I guess that just a basic question. If it's vehicles on the street, why is this in our lap and not ACHD's lap?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Bajent. So this is non-consent towing services. So this can be any type of tow that is not directed by the owner. So it could be, I have signs in my personal business lot that says you cannot park here unless you're a customer. This is our tow company. Then I can call the tow company or ask them to patrol my lot after hours to make sure that nobody is parked there that's not supposed to be there. So those are not things that are on the street. Those are not things that are on city property, but that is what would be considered a non-consent tow, for example.
So I guess the second question is, if it's on private property, why is it a city matter?
What we are doing is licensing those that provide that non-consent tow. So we make sure that we have safety for that they have the appropriate equipment to be towing those things because it is not at the discretion of the owner. So that's my understanding as to why we did non-consent tows. We do not license anybody who only does consent tows. So if I only respond when I am called upon by somebody who needs their car towed, I'm not required to have a license. And actually, the federal government doesn't allow us to license those that only do consent tows, but we do have the authority to license for non-consent tows that are conducted. And again, that's only one example of a non-consent tow.
My second question was, well, first a comment, yes, to Council President Clegg's thoughts on having ideally one place to get inspected. It's going to be really frustrating for people who are getting by on charging predatory fees or who are getting by on being on this list to go possibly 3 different places to be inspected. I can just imagine a lot of frustration. So the Council President's comment was spot on. Then the second thing I was curious about, you mentioned in passing that there were that the BPD was having some challenges or difficulties with the rotation list. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Right now, I think one of the requirements is that for the rotation list, you have to be licensed as a non-consent tow driver. So that's one of the requirements for the list. BPD can certainly manage that list, and I have not reached out to them to see what their current rotation policy is, but they can probably be more restrictive than that. I think a great example is more recently, we've had somebody who had a non-consent tow license and their behavior was less than desirable. However, we couldn't remove them from the rotation list because they weren't in direct violation, or how could we prove that their conduct was not great? Even though we had tons and tons of complaints, I can't prove. It becomes a he said, she said, right? So how can we better align our values, what we want to see with that non-consent list, and how can we embed some of those policy things to be able to then hold people's licenses accountable to some of those challenges, and conduct just being one of those. Another one is somebody who might not clean up after an accident. Requirement of code, if it's proven, we can hold them accountable through their license. But again, how do we make sure that the rotation list is also part of that reward for being compliant, because they're getting calls off that rotation list? And if they're not following those rules, we can then revoke that license, therefore also managing them within that rotation list for police. And we would work very closely with them to make sure that we had the right mechanisms in place.
I think that's great, because one of the things that I've heard is that occasionally people will refuse a tow because based on their assessment of, for example, the economic capacity of the towee, like, hey, I'm not going to get to collect my fees in the lots from this person, I'm not doing it. I've heard that that's a problem. I don't know if that's true, but it would be a bummer if we have partners on a rotation list who somehow get the discretion to refuse jobs. That's not right. So I appreciate that. One other thing, one last thing on the difficult tow issue. As you're looking at that, also recognize that a lot of tows are really easy. So on the flips, so some may be not very profitable or operate at a loss, some may be just absolute cash cows. And so it should net out. And I wouldn't, without more information, I wouldn't be super thrilled about paying people by the hour to tow a car where the incentive is to be slow, consume officer resources while they're waiting around, block up and use public spaces, et cetera. So just things to think about as you're moving through it.
Thank you.
It looks like we've got two more. I saw Jimmy's going first. Sorry, Councilmember Halliburton, then Sanchez. And then we've got to move on to the next topic.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I agree with most of the things that have been said so far, and I agree with Council President Clegg's request as far as the scheduling fees. I'm wondering if there's any reasons why we wouldn't do that, that it would be better for the fees to exist in the ordinance and not on the regular schedule.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, I think there are pros and cons to each approach. We've started going through those. And when I say we, I mean the legal department and myself. And so we can provide that list of pros and cons depending on the various approaches that we might want to look at. I think the only challenge with them not being in code, however, being in our fee schedule and being online, it's still transparent. It's just what is the transparency to the public so they know when their vehicle is towed, what are those fees that they can actually be charged? But again, that could be addressed in various ways, whether in code or on our fee schedule.
Yeah, it makes sense to me to do it that way, but a list of pros and cons would be helpful because I really don't know. And the way that would be easiest for you and easiest for them would really be probably the best way.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Jamie. So you mentioned that there were complaints about some of these folks who do this service. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, that's correct.
Okay. We are living still in volatile times, and we do live in a state that embraces gun culture. And I'm wondering if there's any training for folks who do this service in how to de-escalate, because as council members Woodings and Bajent mentioned, we've got folks who are predatory in this type of work. And there are folks who are under a lot of stress financially. You mentioned inflation, salaries are not keeping pace in our state. And what I would hate to see is for someone who's already on the edge trying to survive to have something like this be the breaking point. And I think for folks who are doing this type of work, I imagine they're also putting themselves in a dangerous situation, but also perhaps they also need to be trained on how to de-escalate and make sure they can do this work. One thing we talked about when we were talking about making changes to the parking ordinance last year was, we've got folks who are suffering, and it's based on the presentation we heard last week. I heard that we have folks who are living hand to mouth. And when they do have interactions with BPD, with code enforcement, that they're then connected with services to help them. So I'm just wondering, is there a possibility or is there training for folks who do this work, and can that be part of the licensing?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, that is not something that is currently within the existing code. However, at the direction of Mayor and Council, we could certainly add that type of training. I don't know what type of training that the industry provides, but we might be able to look at that as an alternative as well to see what the industry might already provide on their own versus the city providing that. But certainly look to each of you for that direction and how to proceed.
Great, thank you. So with that, I think you've gotten direction from various council members on what more they'd like to know. And I expect that we'll hear from you, Amanda or Courtney, on next steps afterwards. So thanks for being here. And next up, we've got Hannah Brass-Greer on the cruising ordinance.
Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. Hannah Brass-Greer from the Mayor's Office. I am here just to give you a really brief update on cruising and ask for your input as we move forward. So just for a little background, cruising, as I think you all know, is the practice of driving around downtown, usually on the weekends, often with loud, high-performance cars. And oftentimes for us downtown, it's 5th to 14th on Main and Idaho. It's been happening for decades. It often does die down right about now. Maybe in the next few weeks, we'll see reduced numbers of cars down there and then picks back up in the spring. And I think, as you know, and certainly Councilmember Winnings, I know you've been part of these conversations, we've seen some increase in complaints to BPD and to mayor's office and members of council about this. I think in large part because we have more businesses and more residents downtown now. So there are just more people complaining, not necessarily a huge increase in those participating in the cruise. And just to focus really on the negative impacts and the behavior that we're looking at here, it's really three main things: excess noise, excess exhaust, and excess speed or racing. And so as we're thinking about how to address this, we really want to focus on those behaviors. And with that in mind, just a couple of ideas that were considered and have been rejected at this point, but certainly open to feedback. One was to create an entirely new ordinance addressing cruising. The difficulty there is defining cruising in a way that's narrow enough to really focus on these behaviors. Ideas about, you can't circle downtown during certain hours more than 3 times, but that would catch me trying to find a parking spot, but not doing it loudly or racing to do it. And another idea was just to create a cruising zone with specific hours and behavior you can't do in a downtown area. We are actually seeing this type of behavior popping up, not to the same extent as downtown, but in other parts of town. So we didn't think that was the best way to address this. So the recommendations working with BPD and other staff are as follows. An increase in fines for exhaust modifications and excess noise. Right now, those fines are at $67. That is not a deterrent. I've been told stories of folks who are being cited, they're pulled over and cited for excess noise, and they're revving their engines while they're being cited. So it's not, that fine level is not working. Another recommendation is to enhance fines for repeat offenses. So going up second, third offense, and or making those second or third offenses a misdemeanor, especially if they're within a specific amount of time. We do think that we have the ordinances in place we need. We don't, as I said, think we need a separate ordinance, but maybe making some adjustments specifically about technologies in cars related to mufflers. Please don't ask me any detailed questions about this because I don't know all the details, but I am told that under our current ordinances, if you have something other than stock mufflers, that's where you can get cited. There are new technologies that are still considered stock, but then have these negative impacts that we want to make sure we can address. And then finally, BPD has looked into and wants to continue to look into additional tools to measure sound and exhaust. And those are things like different phone apps that actually can make the measurement a lot easier than they're able to do right now. And so in terms of next steps, obviously we're here today to ask for your feedback. Certainly any questions you have, I can attempt to answer or get those answers for you as we work on this. Over the next couple months, we'll do that additional research, and the plan would be to come back with any proposed ordinance changes and enforcement plan early next year, so that we then can have hopefully your approval by February or March and ready to implement before the spring uptick in cruise activity. So with that, I stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. This is great. I was expecting to be really skeptical because in my mind, it can't be illegal to drive your car. It can't be illegal to drive your car in circles. And although the cruise isn't my jam, I get that it's part of Boise's culture, and a lot of people really value it. And I think a lot of young people experience our city and their newfound liberty in that way. And that's awesome. That's great. Being loud, being reckless, starting fights, littering, messing up the rest of traffic, all are crimes, and they're already crimes. And so the problems that we hear from the cruise, although they're associated with the cruise, we talk about problems with the cruise, they're really just criminal activity on their own face, regardless of whether somebody's driving their car in the circle. And the approach that I heard was, let's focus on the problems, figure out what we need to do to tackle the problems without inhibiting this, cultural experience for a lot of people in Boise. So I think it's great. I'm fully behind and supportive of what you've proposed. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Yeah, thanks for bringing these forward. I agree with Councilmember Bajent. There's some things that I don't like about what happens at the cruise, and I don't necessarily know how to address it. I think that the third thing that I would have listed with noise, exhaust, and excessive speeding would be harassment that comes, from the vehicles. But again, I think that that's also part of downtown nightlife that we're seeing with an increase of people, not necessarily explicitly for, people that are doing the cruise. I do think that there are other ways of making the cruise less appealing of a place to drive, as far as, we had protected bike lanes on those several years ago, where we had reduced the amount of lanes that were on the street. And if you created a spot where it didn't look like there was a 3-lane freeway running through the middle of downtown Boise, that might be something to consider as well, as like what types of design, what types of speed limits, what types of traffic light timing might actually make that a less appealing place for people to go. And then also, as far as the speeding goes, a less likely place that they'd be able to reach a higher speed. Although I know that a lot of the problem is the revving between light to light and speeding up and the excessive acceleration. But there is an opportunity to speed that could be addressed in a variety of different road construction ways. And so I just wanted to make sure that we put that on the table as well.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you. I think we've heard complaints from businesses about the cruise for many years. But I think for me, the most complaints I heard were the summer of 2020. The first was a business, an optical company, small little company there on 5th, Lumos. And they actually would close on Fridays because they couldn't do business because you couldn't hear. They couldn't hear the conversation with their client, so they just would close, which, that's too bad because it's a small business and they need every dollar they can get. And then another experience I had was before we closed down that section of 8th Street between Maine and Idaho, and I shared this with Council President Clegg. Just sitting outside enjoying, the patio dining. But I thought about it, it's like, it's not just the fact that you've got, folks who are not able to enjoy our city peacefully. It's the fact that, I remember talking to the wait staff who have to be out there subjecting their hearing to damage, breathing in these fumes for hours. My friend Lucy and I were just there for 90 minutes. They're there all night. And so I'm also thinking about the damaging effects to our labor force who has to work downtown and be subjected to these high decibel sounds and the air pollution. And it is purposeful. There is that revving, there is the coal rolling, that sort of thing. So I think beyond a quality of life issue, it's also a safety and health issue for people who are making their living by working in our downtown businesses.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. I also really appreciate this approach. I think it's the right one. Enforce what we have on the books and see where we go. As I was listening to you, the one thing that I would reiterate is that we make sure that the police have the tools that they need to make this work. And so part of that may be a way to measure exhaust so that if we have folks rolling coal, for instance, we can cite them for that exhaust. Right now, I think it's hard to do. Another is to ensure that the penalties, as you mentioned, are sufficient. And I'm fully supportive of going all the way to misdemeanor if needed, and making sure that we have a system that if that were to happen, that person has some other, in other words, if they go all the way to misdemeanor, they don't just start over, right? So that they don't have an incentive to keep doing this. So look forward to, I know you guys are really good at figuring out how to actually make those things work. And I look forward to seeing what those solutions are.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I appreciate all of my fellow council members' comments a lot. I think that they're all salient and an important part of the conversation. We did quite a lot of outreach on the problems that are presented by the cruise. And I think that they really get back to what Hannah said before. We just have more users in downtown now. We have people who live there. We have vibrant street level businesses. And so any additional noise and any additional behaviors just kind of create this chaotic scene downtown. And it's not consistent with our vision of having a really vibrant downtown that people can come and enjoy. So I think that getting to those behaviors is really the right way. And even after talking to some folks who are part of the cruising community, and they're like, we just want to drive our car around. I'm like, dude, that's fine. You should. Absolutely. If you spend that much time and that much money creating your prized vehicle, you should be able to drive it around. Do not modify the exhaust. Do not roll down your windows and blast your music, because it just contributes to that really kind of chaotic environment that I don't think is what we want at all. So I think that this plan, if the penalties are sufficient, if we have an enforcement plan and a rollout plan, and I think also education plan for the community around what this is going to look like when it rolls out, I think it could be really successful. And if it's not, I would encourage us to go back quickly and say, okay, how can we adjust this so that we can make it successful, not next fall, but subsequently rolling into the spring and summer. So thanks. I appreciate all your support.
Madam Mayor, maybe just one more quick thing to add. One, thank you for your work on this and for all the stakeholder outreach. I think that's really important for the people who are doing the cruise and for the business owners as well. I want to maybe just add one more specific point to the idea of addressing some of the ways that the streets look, is that if we're creating a culture that prioritizes vehicles during the downtown time, then that's what we'll see. If we created a culture where we were prioritizing pedestrians in the downtown area during those congested times at night, then we would see more of that activity. And some of that activity would change that behavior, I think, as well. And one of the things that I noticed recently going through downtown is that a lot of the crosswalks, as people were going through, aren't actually long enough during these times when there's so many people downtown for the entire group of people to cross the road. Certainly not someone who's elderly, definitely not somebody who's in a wheelchair. And so again, there may be ways where we can even look at crosswalks and prioritizing people and designing our downtown during those times of congestion, which are typically your Friday and your Saturday nights during the summertime around people. And that may have an effect on how wonderful it is to drive your car down through the middle of downtown as well.
Well, I think these are all really good points. And I do want to thank Councilmember Woodings for your work on this, and Hannah as well. Downtown Boise Association is here. Thanks for the outreach that you've helped us do. And I really appreciate Councilmember Halliburton's suggestions too, that we figure out if there's some design things with lights for people, et cetera, that we look at in addition to the ordinance changes or behavioral changes we're attempting to create or to address, excuse me.
Madam Mayor, I just want to repeat back what I think I'm hearing. One is that staff is headed in the right direction with the ordinance. And then as it relates to further enhancements of downtown planning, as it relates to traffic and pedestrians, perhaps this is the topic of a joint ACHD meeting.
I think that's a great suggestion because in the last couple of years, we've seen downtown is used so much more than it was, which is wonderful. It's helpful to our businesses. It creates a great neighborhood for folks that are choosing to move downtown. We'll see 2,000 more units, I believe, in the next year permitted for downtown living. So these interactions will continue to be at issue. And the more that we can do to ensure that downtown is people-centered in terms of how streets and usage are managed, I think the better off we'll all be. And as Councilmember Wooding said as well, it's much more in alignment with our vision for the experience we want to make available to our residents than just addressing the behavior piece. So the more we can do in parallel, I think the better off we are.
Great.
Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor, can I just tag on to Courtney's idea for the ACHD work session as well? If she would like to be involved, I would also encourage us to invite DBA Executive Director Jen Hensley to that conversation. Just going to flag that.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to move into a discussion of the property tax rebate program with Eric Vilmoria and Lana. And this was an exciting part of the budget that we approved, taking advantage of the new law that the legislature passed that allows us to create a rebate program. And we wanted to target this to those who are currently on the circuit breaker. So not only provide tax relief to those currently on the circuit breaker, but importantly, increase the number of folks that are on the circuit breaker because they qualify but don't necessarily know it or haven't had the opportunity to apply. And so this update's an important update, and I hope also that the public is able to get some information from this update so that we can further our goals of providing property tax relief and rebates to more people in the coming year. We're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, so we'll stick with the 30 minutes that this was planned for and then take a quick break before we jump into the hour on Micron readiness.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Apologize for that slight delay there. This morning, we'd like to provide an overview of the property tax rebate program that was approved by the City Council as part of the 2023 adopted budget. There's really been a lot of work that has gone into getting us to where we are right now, really across the organization. Many of those folks are in the room. I see Rob up there, Rob Lockwood, the community engagement team, Lana, Brady, and Maria, as well as in the budget team. And really, Lisa Owens has been the mastermind of all of this, and she's here with us today. The recommendations that we'll be going over this morning were really carefully crafted in order to comply with the way this bill was drafted, allowing cities the ability to provide these rebates. After we go through the recommendations and the proposed rollout, we'd also like to go over some changes we might like to see going forward to this bill to ease in the administrative burden associated with this program. So again, to reiterate, this program wasn't allowable for cities prior to this fiscal year. As part of the 2022 state legislative session, cities were granted the ability to provide property tax rebates for the first time through House Bill 550. Seizing the opportunity, the Boise City Council approved the allocation of $1.2 million as part of this current fiscal year's budget in order to benefit taxpayers who were approved to participate in the state's property tax reduction program, otherwise known as the circuit breaker program. Those participants needed to apply for that program no later than April 18th of 2022. In order to participate in that statewide program, there are certain criteria that need to be fulfilled. The first being you need to be an Idaho resident. Second, you need to own and occupy either a home or a mobile home that doesn't exceed the legal limit. Currently, that's on a statewide basis, $300,000. There was an amendment to those limitations as part of this past legislative session that increased the legal limit to 150% of the median assessed value within the county. And within Ada County, that's approximately $800,000 for that home value. The total income for calendar year 2021 has to be $32,230 or less. And any participant must meet one of the following criteria: either be 65 years of age or older, a former prisoner of war or a hostage, blind, a widow or widower, or disabled. Specifically, the language that was included in House Bill 550 allowing property tax rebates as outlined on this slide. City councils are empowered to issue property tax rebates from the general fund to property taxpayers within its jurisdiction. There's a requirement for an ordinance, and that ordinance needs to describe the following. It needs to describe the total amount appropriated for the program. And for the city, that would be $1.2 million. Instructions and a deadline for property taxpayers to apply for the rebate. The formula for determining the property tax rebate and the method for distributing the rebates and any other necessary administrative matters. And there are certain requirements that cities, must abide by. So the first one is, and it's less of a requirement, but it's outlined in the ordinance, is that any cities that choose to participate in the circuit breaker program will receive a list of eligible participants from the State Tax Commission so that anybody eligible can be appropriately noticed. The second requirement is that any rebate that is paid on behalf of the applicant through the circuit breaker program may not exceed the property taxes payable to the property owner on that particular property. So the circuit breaker program provides a benefit to property owners. When you add that benefit to any potential rebate, that cannot exceed the tax bill for that particular jurisdiction. And then thirdly, cities aren't required to do this. We know of one, which is us, that are offering this program. If a rebate program is funded in an insufficient amount to rebate all claims, the proper rebate claims shall be added up, and every rebate share shall be reduced in a uniform amount. When we came up with the recommendation for $1.2 million, it was based on prior year information, and we did our best to try and alleviate in our recommendation property tax bills for those who would be participating. But again, it was based on prior year tax rolls. So if the number of people changed or their tax bills look significantly different, we may end up in a situation where we have slightly less or even slightly more than need be.
Just a couple follow-up questions there, Eric. When you say that we're the only city that you know of doing this, do you mean the way we're doing it from a circuit breaker perspective, or we're the only city that you're aware of that is taking advantage of this property tax rebate legislation?
Excuse me, sorry, Mayor. We are the only city that I'm aware of that is taking advantage of this rebate program in its totality.
Okay.
Yes.
And then on the other question, the other question I have is related to if we get fewer or more claimants as it relates to the $1.2 million. If I just want to make sure that all of those that currently qualify are able to or know to go through our program. So does that happen automatically, or will we see that there are folks that don't request, that are getting the circuit breaker program but haven't requested it from the city, and we can return to them?
This is a rebate program, so there is an active role that the folks that are eligible for this program are going to have to take. Lana's going to go through how we reach those eligible taxpayers.
Great, thank you.
So as outlined in House Bill 550, cities need to prepare an ordinance. Pending any feedback upon the conclusion of this presentation, staff intends to bring the ordinance forward for City Council consideration in November. I'll now hand it over to Lana to go through the outreach and communication plan.
2 microphones. I don't know if I need to be that loud. Good morning, everyone. So Mayor, as you messaged, our goal with this is to reach as many people as possible who are eligible. And because it is a rebate program, they will have to apply for the program. So our outreach is really focused on the number of people who qualify and getting to them in every possible way. I won't go through this because Eric has already spoken to it. So our core messages are that we are launching this rebate program that offers qualified Boiseans a property tax rebate. They must meet this criteria that we've already talked about, which is not similar, exactly the same as the circuit breaker program. And qualified homeowners may receive a tax rebate of their remaining city of Boise property taxes after accounting for the circuit breaker program. And we will offer eligible homeowners several ways to access the program, including online and in-person opportunities. And the applications will be open from December 1st until May 1st, 2023. So as I just mentioned, the focus is really targeted on outreach to the approximately 1,200 homeowners to ensure they have information and access to apply for the program.
And that the 1,200 is that number based when we say currently eligible? Those are the folks that are currently using the circuit breaker program?
Those are the folks who are eligible for the circuit breaker program. That's correct.
They're eligible and not necessarily using the circuit breaker program, or they automatically get the circuit breaker program? I'm just wanting to be clear as to whether or not there are additional folks beyond the people already getting the circuit breaker program that we need to build into our outreach over time.
Thank you, Mayor. The 1,200 is the number of folks that were eligible as of the prior fiscal year.
Okay.
Applications to participate in the circuit breaker program for the current fiscal year were due April 18th of 2022. So there is a finite number of participants as part of this particular cycle. And we're capitalizing upon that.
Because we're doing
list.
it retroactively in a way. They've already qualified.
Correct.
However, for the public, there are possibly folks that qualify, and if they applied in the future, they would then be eligible for our program in the future. There are more than 1,200 people in Boise who could potentially receive the circuit breaker.
That is a very likely scenario, and they would be able to participate through the statewide program and any future city rebate programs.
Great. So this outreach is designed for those currently eligible, and they're eligible because they've already filled out an application. So I would like over time for us to have a strategy as well to connect with those who qualify but don't or haven't submitted an application to expand the property tax relief as far as possible to our residents.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have a couple of recommendations for how to reach folks who qualify. One is being direct mail, and we know that that's still our best outreach method to reach a broad range of folks. And so we'll announce the program and how to access it. This will include a letter that will hit mailboxes the same week that people receive their tax bills for the year. And it'll include an application with it for ease of use for people to be able to fill it out and submit it at that time. We will also do some reminder postcards throughout the cycle that the application process is open. We're also looking into canvassing. Eric mentioned that we'll get the list of eligible folks from the tax commission. That'll happen likely in November. And so we'll be able to see, work with IT and look at our GIS system to see where folks are and if it makes sense to do phone calls or in-person canvassing or both. So we'll have kind of a more refined process there once we see who the folks are and where they are within our city. We will also have hard copies of the application here at City Hall and at our neighborhood libraries, knowing that people often frequent our libraries and City Hall for resources. And we will announce the program to our local media to get further reach, and then also have a City of Boise website landing page so people can download the application there, see what the requirements are, and have the resources available online as well. And we do have a dedicated email, as you can see here, that people can reach out to and email to if they have specific questions to the program, so they're not being directed in different directions.
Madam Mayor. Lana, I think that this is a really great list. I'd like to also add, because this isn't a real broad swath of folks. Like, we know who they are, we know, where they live. And we know that we have service providers who are already likely making contact with a lot of these folks, like Meals on Wheels. So exploring some of those potential partnerships to educate maybe Meals on Wheels volunteers about the program and make sure that they know, in case they get any questions from their folks that they deliver to.
Yep, Madam Mayor, it's following up on council, I guess I don't understand, like, somebody knows, right? The state knows everybody who paid less than $33,000 in income tax and their age and their address. And the county knows what their house is assessed for. So like, aren't there two spreadsheets within the state of Idaho that could be cross-referenced and merged and make a list of every person who qualifies, not everybody who applied and not everybody, like, I mean, I get that working with multiple agencies is difficult, but why can't we just go do that?
Yeah, and that sounds like it's part of the long-term outreach strategy. If our goal is to increase the usage of the circuit breaker program within our community. And then we've got the outreach strategy for those who can currently get it in this current budget year with the $1.2 million that we provided for relief.
Yeah, fair. That's really, I'm like, this is great, but it just seems like we can't every year be going out looking for people who the governor and the tax assessor like know who they are. So that was just my observation. Second, adding to Councilmember Whitting's list is this group of people is probably also very likely to be using our libraries. And so that's a great place to be doing this outreach as well.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. It occurs to me.
And we're
that-
moving into tactical. So I want to give Lana a chance if there are additional tactics that you have here
Oh, sure.
to cover them after the council president makes some comments.
Okay, I'll be real quick. I was going to say the healthcare providers probably also have a lot of contact with some of these folks. And so we might reach out there. And then I really appreciate Councilmember Bajan's idea. And, this year we have who's qualified and we can only rebate to them as I understand it. But next year we should be looking really hard to reach out more broadly.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Lana, Eric, is there a large number of people who qualify for the circuit breaker, but for whatever reason don't enroll?
Councilmember Sanchez, unfortunately, I don't have that information available. Right now, we're kind of dependent upon the applications. There could be further work that we could do along the lines of Councilmember Bajan's question to try and determine the number of people. There are certain requirements that we'd have to layer into that analysis, the assessed value for the home, some of the criteria for participation, which might not be available on income tax returns or other returns. So it's very difficult to answer that question, but the speculation is that there probably are a number of folks that aren't participating in that program or aware of it.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up, just to clarify. So in order to participate in the program, we're offering the rebate. They just have to be qualified for the circuit breaker. They don't have to be currently enrolled in the circuit breaker.
Councilmember, they have to be enrolled in the circuit breaker program. They have to be approved. They had to have applied by April 18th. So gone through the active process of registering for the program, seeing if they met the criteria and approved by the state.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The one thing I do want to note that'll be important for applications we talked about libraries is that people won't be able to submit them there. They'll still, because they have social security numbers and private information, they'll still be required to mail them in, but we will have envelopes that people can have that'll be pre-stamped to be able to send them in. So kind of moving into the timeline of things, we will look to go to council in November. Sorry, I don't know where I got May. I'm hoping it's May because I don't like cold weather. In November, so we'll announce right after the ordinance goes before mayor and council. We will receive that list. We're thinking it'll be early to mid-November from the tax commission, which again will help us really refine our outreach strategy and tactics. And then we'll launch the webpage and do internal talking points. So all of our staff, we imagine DFA and our front counter staff will get quite a few questions to make sure we're all providing the same information to our residents. December 1st is when the application opens, and that's when the letter will be in mailboxes with the application, again, to be around the same time that people receive their tax bills. And then we will start with phone calls to residents who qualify for the program. And then looking into the new year in February, We will do a reminder postcard to residents who qualify for the program. And then canvassing will start in spring, again, to folks who qualified but maybe have not applied for the program yet. We will have a spreadsheet that we will track who qualifies based on who's been qualified for the circuit breaker program and who's applied for this program, so that we're not reaching out to people who have already applied, but we're really targeting folks that we're just not able to reach to hopefully get them to apply for this program. And then we'll do a final reminder postcard in April, and then May is when the application closes.
Madam Mayor, just a quick follow-up. Thank you, Lana. It wasn't listed on there. I assumed it's going to happen. We're going to use social media to promote this as well.
Yes, so Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, yes, we will do social media outreach. We have our In the Know newsletter. This is just a highlight. I can provide a more detailed outreach plan, but it includes all of that as well.
And we're going to use our multiple languages to reach folks.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, yes.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I have one more slide.
Yeah,
And
but
this,
before you move into desired, I just want to kind of wrap up some of this and point out that you can see from this, and I appreciate that you've looked beyond this current designation. So because these are some of the things that we were getting at, because as you can see, we want to make sure as many Boiseans as possible that I don't even know which word to use, because there's technical words and then there's like normal people words that we're all using around the table. We want to make sure that every Boisean that could get the circuit breaker in the future gets the circuit breaker. And so I appreciate that you have put together a plan to reach out and, to find and converse with and connect any Boisean that could get the circuit breaker with the circuit breaker in the future, because it's our desire to provide that additional rebate to our residents. And I appreciate that you've put together a plan also that includes the ordinance that's necessary for us to provide immediate, meaning the current timeframe, property tax relief to those Boiseans who already get the circuit breaker. And so it's important that we're planning for both to expand the relief that we provide to our residents. And I see in this plan that you're doing that, which myself and council really wanted us to do. So I appreciate that. I look forward next to the conversation of what might make it easier for us to make sure that any Boisean that could get the circuit breaker gets it, both from the state or the county, whichever one technically gives it, but most importantly, the city. And so this next piece of the conversation will help inform the work that Kathy and our team at the legislature does to provide meaningful property tax relief to not just Boiseans. I'd encourage any city to do the same for their residents.
Can I just add one comment to your remarks? One conversation I often have with Boise residents is they ask, why can't you do this? And Idaho is what is called a Dillon's Rule state. The city can do things that the legislature gives us express permission in state statute to do. We can't really do things without the risk of getting into lawsuits that the state either says we can't do or doesn't give us express permission to do. So I think this is a great example of a way that the state has given us a tool to give some relief to our residents as property values go up, as that differential between residential property values and commercial property values really puts the burden of property taxes onto residents to maintain the levels of service that Boiseans have become accustomed to and enjoy throughout the years, whether that's parks, libraries, public safety. And so this is a way that we can remain committed to those levels of service and also make sure that the folks who are really feeling the impact of those increases to residential property taxes can get some relief. So I just want to thank, in case anyone from the legislature is watching this work session, which I highly doubt.
Because they always do.
They always do. But just thank anyone in the legislature who is supportive of this really great statute that gives us a way to make meaningful contributions to our community, which isn't always the case with state statute, but this is a really good example of how it worked.
Madam Mayor, just to thank you, Councilmember Whittings, for highlighting that, because you're right. I think, our residents can get frustrated with some of the work that we're not able to do. And I would in particular like to thank Representative Gannon of District 17, who worked really hard to ensure that this element was in this legislation so that we could do this. And I would like to echo Mayor McLean. I hope other cities will follow suit and embrace this opportunity to offer relief to their residents.
Thank you very much for those comments. It's a nice segue into the next slide. Because we're very appreciative of this program. We do think that there might be some modifications to the bill that might increase participation and reduce administrative burden associated with this. So I'll go through those. The first potential improvement could be to eliminate the application process. As it stands right now, there's an active thing that anyone who wants to participate in this must do, which is in addition to any work that they might have done to actually get on the property tax reduction program rolls. What we might propose or think about going forward would be enabling cities to offer rebates or credits in the following way. If programs are structured around the circuit breaker program, allow cities to directly offer rebates or credits based on the application for that program. So in other words, when they apply, they are instantly eligible for any city rebate that would be associated with that, as opposed to making them go through a separate secondary process. The second idea would be if cities wished in the future to offer a property tax reduction program to everybody, effectively allow them to buy down the levy rate on a one-time basis while still allowing base growth. And that could be structured similarly to the governor's public safety property tax grant initiative from 2021. The second idea would be to allow cities to credit the property tax bill versus sending a rebate. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the rebate process, based on the way that the bill is structured, doesn't get the funding into the hands of folks participating in this program until their second payment has been made, because we need to validate that the rebate doesn't exceed their total liability and that they have actually paid their property taxes. The second thing is that the rebate versus a credit requires a 1099-G form to be issued. So it requires the cities to provide a check, and then requires the participants to figure out what that 1099-G does to their tax, to their future tax returns. Whereas if a credit was issued, there would be no 1099-G required because there wouldn't be considered as income.
So I just have a question on that to make that real, because that is complicated. And I'm going to turn it back to what just happened at the state. So my kids just got checks from the state. Was that a rebate for their taxes? Does that mean whatever the governor just sent out to everybody? Does that mean that everybody that gets a rebate, so I need to tell my kids to look for a new tax form so that they don't mess up their taxes next year? And the reason I ask is because if that's how this is designed, that is something that's really tough, especially when you think about the folks that get the circuit breaker to then be like on the lookout for another form that they then have to give to somebody to do the right thing so they don't make a mistake on their taxes. That would be a great help to the people and change in the bills to prevent that, right? Because they don't necessarily have parents saying, go find this tax form. You got to have this tax form. The folks that are on the circuit breaker program.
Absolutely. And Mayor, to answer your question, I don't have specific knowledge, but based on my understanding of how these 1099-G forms would work, it would make sense to me that folks that are receiving the rebates that are currently going out right now would be receiving one of those forms.
Wow. Okay.
With that, I'd be happy. I think that concludes our conversation. Wanda and I would be happy to stand for any additional questions.
Madam Mayor, just two additional comments on the desired modifications. First, if you have to apply for it, it's a wonderful piece of legislation and I love it and I'm glad we're doing it, but since the legislature is listening, if you have to apply for it, it's not a circuit breaker yet. That's a switch. The circuit breaker happens automatically. So taking the application process out of it makes our circuit breaker an actual circuit breaker, which is what we want. So I hope that happens. And then second, on the second proposed modification, in addition to everything you pointed out about the complicated tax stuff, the administrative burden of writing checks, the other point is, like, for these people, we don't want their money in the first place, right? So anything we can do to not collect it and let them keep it is easier on us because we don't have to issue checks, do all this administrative work, and it's easier on them because they get to keep their money. So that's just another great reason for that second modification you proposed as well.
Madam Mayor, question. So earlier in the presentation, you talked about the city of Boise being the only city that you know at this point that's taking advantage of this opportunity. Do you think that that is because of the administrative burden that it placed on the cities to try to figure all of this out? And do you think that if this were to change, if you eliminated the application process, that it might make it more possible for other cities to examine it as well?
Yeah, thank you very much, council member, for that question. I would strongly suspect that it is due to the administrative burden. There was really a lot of work to ensure that we could make this happen for the community. And, you know, as Lana went through all the various outreach approaches and ensuring that you reach people participating in the circuit breaker program, that really does represent a lot of work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Madam Mayor, just a second question there. Do we know what the state does as far as outreach for folks that are eligible for the circuit breaker?
Council member, I'm not aware of any outreach. I think the program is available and it's incumbent upon the applicants to find the information and apply on their own.
Okay.
I will say that, you know, as part of the dialogue that has been around property taxes, it frequently comes up, but I'm not aware of active outreach efforts. There may be some, but I'm not aware of them.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, I will just add that we've done outreach this last year on the state's behalf through our outreach because it's on their website. I think they've included it in a newsletter, but they're definitely not reaching the folks that are eligible. And so we've also tried to do our diligence in getting it out to people who may be eligible.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My previous life as a paralegal, I worked with a lot of folks who were living in poverty and the aged. And what I found is the more help you need, the harder it is to get it. I remember going to a continuing legal education course that was for lawyers on how to work with Medicare. And I saw a lot of lawyers scratching their heads. So if there's anything we can do, I think to minimize the confusion for folks to be able to access this really important resource, anything we can do to encourage that, I fully support. And I think it's very telling. Thank you for sharing with us the fact that, you know, you didn't wait for the state to do more to reach out to these folks, that we need that for our residents and that we will do that if we have to make sure that folks get that. But I would agree with Councilmember Bajent. This should be automatic, especially when you're considering the whole point. The whole point is to help people who are vulnerable, who they need the assistance to begin with. To add another level of bureaucracy that makes it onerous for them to get the resources they need doesn't make sense. So thank you for your efforts on our residents' behalf.
Madam Mayor, I just had one more thought. So my mom might actually apply or qualify for a circuit breaker program in Oregon where she lives, and I don't really know. She probably doesn't really know. So I think that going back to kind of the community engagement plan, those more general kind of outreach opportunities are great, because then maybe I would find out about something that my mom could qualify for that she doesn't know she could qualify for. Because I think that as we get older, as our parents age, sometimes it's the children who are the ones who make those connections. So just an initial thought that I had. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing the ordinance and getting this program rolling for our residents in this next calendar year and working on improvements so that all of those who could receive it are able to receive it more easily in the future. And with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break and then we'll be back. Welcome, Councilmember Willits. I just want to make sure that the clerk has reflected that you've joined us. And we've got a 10-minute break. Well, we're going to move into the presentation now by our team on our, I'm going to call it Micron readiness. But first, I just wanted to say a couple things. And this, as we all know, is the announcement that Micron made, the investment they're making in our community truly is a generational investment. It's a once in a generation opportunity for our kids and theirs and beyond. And I'm really proud of the work that our team it has done and is doing to support the investments and also to have brought this investment to our city because it wasn't a given. And we knew that when we were approached by Micron with what they hope to do if the CHIPS and Science Act passed, and that is bring back manufacturing to our country, that we had both incredible potential for our future and future jobs here in Boise and frankly in the state, and incredible potential to keep or return the innovation that has been part of their history here in Boise to Boise. And that was our goal, that we attract, importantly, the R&D investment that Micron would have to make when they started to build their chips here in the United States rather than abroad. So we attract that R&D investment and that we attract the highest paying jobs possible for our residents and be the center of next generation chip manufacturing and research and development, importantly, in our country. And that's what this investment will do for our residents now and into the future. And we really appreciate that the company continues to partner with us on the goals that we share, the values that we share. You know, I wanted to make it clear that we're working closely with Micron in our shared pursuits of growing our economy and protecting our clean water, and we'll hear a little bit about that today, attracting and sustaining a diverse and dynamic workforce. And, you know, as we all know, we've evolved together, the history, partnership, and importantly, the shared values and the shared goals that I just mentioned exist. And it was both that and our willingness to innovate and lead on things that are important to the company, such as clean water, that made it possible for us to convince them to make this investment here. So today, our team has some updates. We've got various folks that were part of the team that worked with the company in our pursuit of attracting this investment, and then importantly, are ready and prepared and know what must be done to be able to deliver on our commitment to the company, which is to support them in the permitting and other processes that they have to go through in order to make their vision of R&D and first and kind of first in line chip manufacturing possible here. And so as part of that, you'll hear after the presentations that we have an interim budget change because we know that there are resources that will both come in, but that also need to be expended in terms of people in partnership with the company to make this happen. And that's some of what we'll talk about today, our readiness, the plans that we've developed, and what we know we have to do to be able to deliver on and in partnership with Micron on the development of this next fab.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor, Mayor, members of the council. It's an honor to be here today with all of you and my staff colleagues. I'm going to give a broad overview of the project and what we know, where we are today, provide an update on some of the good work that our staff has done to move this project forward in the last couple of months since the announcement, and set the context, as the mayor mentioned, for the interim budget change and what that may mean in terms of future agreements for this council. So with that, I'll start with this overview and mention, as the mayor said, that this was an effort that it's a culmination of over a year's worth of work on the city's behalf, as well as a collaborative effort with a number of partners across the valley. And I'll also mention that it was a competitive process. This was never a guarantee. This was work that involved a number of different sites, potential sites across the country and even abroad. And the work that our city did, along with our partners, to make Boise the opportunity that the company ultimately chose, was something that was intentional and was a result of the hard work of a number of partners and staff that were involved in this effort. At the end of the extensive selection process that we were involved in, we were proud to receive a project of both significant size and scope, but also one that was right size for our community and very much aligned with our existing goals for strategic economic growth. The project itself represents a $15 billion investment in our community, which is the largest investment of its kind in Idaho, certainly Boise. The investment will result in approximately 2,000 direct jobs by the end of the decade, as well as 15,000 ancillary jobs, such as jobs that will support the manufacturing efforts of this research and development and manufacturing facility. The jobs will focus on both R&D and advanced manufacturing for semiconductors, specifically memory chips, with wages that are well above average for a city. The city and the company worked hard to come to mutual agreement on a number of key priorities for the project. These include an efficient and timely permitting process, providing opportunities to right size things like permitting fees. For example, our typical permitting fee calculations are based upon overall project value. This project value being in the $15 billion range required us to come to an agreement with the company that involved extensive work with our staff to understand what was fair and what was appropriate for a permitting fee based upon a project valuation, and what are some alternative ways that we could have used to come to that. So proud to say that using some creative thinking and innovative approaches, we've come to more or less an agreement with the company on how to approach those permitting fees. It also involved close collaboration on the development of advanced water renewal facilities that will both meet the specific needs of the company, as well as provide an exceptional value to the public. This was helped by the fact that our public works team has worked in partnership with the company in the recent past on a advanced pilot project, and Steve can speak more to that. But that set the stage for much of the work that is being done right now to advance this large-scale water renewal project that will be among the first of its kind in the country, and something that we're very proud to be able to achieve with the resources that we have on hand. Also, at a high level, the project team required a mutual understanding that this growing workforce would need places to live and ways to get to and from home and work. So on the housing side, that means a commitment that we made to cooperate, ensuring that we could use our regulatory and policy tools to work proactively to support the private sector's ability to build new housing, as well as move forward significant housing initiatives that are underway with the city of Boise as of now. On the transportation side, it meant working with our partners, for example, at Valley Regional Transit, to support the study of potential eventual implementation of new routes that could support this growing workforce and effectively support their mobility needs. And finally, to continue to uphold our commitment and steadfast leadership to ensure that Boise is a leading voice as a city for everyone and a welcoming community for all. And this includes working closely with our partners across the valley, as well as the company, strengthening those relationships that will help to advance the higher education, career technical education, and other workforce initiatives across the valley. So with that, I will pass it to Steve to speak more to the specifics of the water renewal facility, plans ahead, work underway, and our overall picture there. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, John. Good morning. Steve Burgos, Public Works Director. And just want to give you an overview of the work that we're planning for the Micron facility. But before I do that, let me take a step back. And just as a reminder for the council, back in 2020, we passed the Water Renewal Utility Plan. As part of that project, we specifically called out the potential for a recycled water program to start in the southeast portion of the city. And part of the idea was we could, in that area that was zoned industrial, potentially promote economic development. And so that was the start of what we refer to as a recycled water program. We're happy to report that that approach seemed to lead to good things, maybe a little bit bigger and faster than we thought. But we're excited about the Micron opportunity because it aligns very much with what you all passed as part of that utility plan to promote recycled water and economic development in the Southeast. So thinking about the specific project for Micron, we're really excited about the opportunity that it presents for us on several fronts. One is being able to build off the foundation of the original plan that we developed and being able to go back to the community who expressed their interest in recycled water. That was one of the probably the number one items that came from the feedback from the public was to pursue recycled water program and keep that water local. So this project helps us support that vision, again, at an even larger scale than we initially thought. We're going to be able to leverage alignment with the company on climate action. They are very much engaged on renewable energy, on recycled water. It is a very intentional part of their vision moving forward. We're really excited about that alignment that we have on those issues with the city and Micron. This particular treatment plant is going to be leveraging some really interesting innovation and technology. It'll be one of the most advanced wastewater treatment plants in the country. It's going to be looking at new technologies that really have not been used in but just a couple of places in the country. We're excited about that. That's in part because we have the pilot program set up, hopefully going to get the equipment on site this fall and winter to start the pilot project that will help support the selection of some of the treatment technology that's coming. And then it's going to enhance that long-term community water supply. So once we start recycling water, we're not going to be consistently going back to the community water supply. In effect, we'll be creating close to a closed loop system, hopefully, as the project moves forward. So therefore protecting that long-term water supply for the valley. So initially, when we talked about the utility plan, we had a project laid out that was going to be a 5 MGD facility, 5 million gallons per day facility that was going to come online in 2029. That project is still required. We're still moving forward on that project. Just so happens that we refer to it as ID1. The new manufacturing facility is going to have its own treatment plant. And we're working with Micron on very specific information that we need to start designing that facility and selecting equipment. It's a pretty quick turnaround. And so that's one of the reasons for the IBC, both to amend the contract with our recycled water program consultant, but also ask for FTEs because we need to really start to define the project quickly. So that we can then move into a design and construction phase to meet a pretty tight deadline on the Micron side for the project. So our next steps are, in order to do that project definition, that will help us refine cost and schedule, refine the construction approach, the investment strategies, and again, that requires an amendment to the contract and the FTEs. So what you'll see this afternoon, or I guess at 12, at council meeting is going to be that interim budget change for those changes to support the project. And certainly I can stand for any questions you may have. But lots of questions we're still working through. I think we'll probably get to this at the end, but I'll steal Christine. So there's probably more questions than answers at this point. And that's one of the reasons that we need to start moving forward with some of this work to start getting those answers that are required to design the facility.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So Steve, if I'm understanding you correctly, then what this allows us to do is move forward on our renewable water facility more quickly than we would have otherwise, and maybe at a deeper, bigger rate than we would have envisioned without this kind of a partnership. And in order to do that, we'll have to make budget amendments to move the funding forward, funding that has already been approved by the Public funding that we've already arranged to bond for, but move it forward in the budget so that we can get started.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, yes, but I want to be very clear. We are not intending to use any of the bond financing for the Micron specific project.
Oh, okay.
We're not planning on that.
I would say the Micron portion of the project, correct?
That's correct.
Because the bond financing, it's all the same facility. The facility is bigger than envisioned in our water renewal plan and in the bond. And so the bond will be used because it's been approved for the public portion,
Okay.
which is being advanced in a decade ahead of schedule because of the Micron investment. Micron is making an investment that's, what's the right word? That's aligned with the growth in scale and that above what we had anticipated with the bond.
That's
Great.
correct, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. That helps.
Madam Mayor? Thank you. Thank you, Steve. So you said that this technology is relatively new. And you talked about how mostly this will be a closed system, right? Do we know what the water will be used for, what that cycle of water will be used for?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, don't know just yet. We're working with the company to figure that out. That's one of the next kind of really important first steps to get defined. That'll start to set the treatment technology and design criteria to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the company. But a lot of that is to be determined based on conversations we're currently having.
Madam Mayor, just a quick follow-up. So I'm just asking that in terms of those folks who may be watching, who may be trepidatious about new technology and our willingness to be innovative and to be the first penguins off the ice floe, as it were. And how do we ensure that there's safety involved, that there's not long-term consequences for our community in embracing this new technology?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sanchez, thank you for the question. So a couple things. One, the technology that we're proposing is a proven technology. It exists oftentimes used for drinking water systems. The wastewater industry hasn't necessarily used it yet because we haven't had to, because recycled water, at least in Idaho, hasn't been a huge priority. And secondly, we're going to continue to move forward with our community engagement pieces. We started back a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, with the National Water Research Institute panel, where we flew in experts from around the country to help us better define what are the key questions around recycled water so that we can be ahead of the issues as they're coming. We have the pilot test that we're going to continue with to prove up the technology. We're going to invite the public out to see that pilot test and show them, okay, here's when we say advanced treatment, what does that look like? Touch it, feel it. So those are all going to still be part of the process moving forward. So we're hopeful that that community engagement piece will pay off and make sure that we're reassuring the public that this water will be safe. Yep.
Mayor, members of council, I'm just going to give you a brief update on where we stand in planning as it relates to this project. This is something that the planning department has experience with, of course, having enabled the original construction of what we have at the Micron campus today years ago. The difference today, of course, is the city's growing in a way that is different than then. We have a lot more development happening in cases and buildings that we're processing. For us, the day the announcement happened on Micron's decision, we got together and prepared a schedule for them. The planning and zoning team within Planning and Development Services quickly got together. This is Jessica Zelag's team, to chart a course for them as it relates to annexation, zoning, and they need some approvals related to height on the site. So that is working through the process now. So really the planning and zoning team within PDS is heavily engaged right now and helping them through the process to meet their deadlines. So they'll actually be to the Planning and Zoning Commission on November 14th, and you will see that soon. Of course, this is just the first phase of that. That will continue for the foreseeable future as information becomes available and as these plans evolve. So that team will be heavily engaged for quite some time, but that process has begun and it's going well. Then we will shift and have already started to shift into buildings to do the permitting for the buildings themselves. We've begun discussions with Micron around how we will phase those permits, and those that process has begun. It will, of course, be picking up steam after they get through the entitlement process and even during the entitlement process, because of the way we can phase permits, and this isn't unusual for Micron, is we can phase the permit such that they're not wasting time. So that once they're through the entitlement process, they can proceed as quickly as possible with construction. So we'll be hand in hand with them, as we are with other applicants, to make sure we're being as deliberate and efficient with our time as it relates to permitting as we possibly can. When it comes to permitting, one lesson learned from the previous work here is that we really need a dedicated person to be responsible for plan review and permitting, and then also inspections there. We've had at times inspectors, kind of housed much of their time at Micron to deal with inspections that need to occur so that construction can continue. And that's especially important right now, given the volume of work that everybody has, including our plans examiners and our inspectors. So one of the things that you will see in the interim budget change is the addition of 2 positions in buildings to help with that, because over the course of the next several months, this will become a bigger and bigger part of their responsibilities. And we certainly don't want to in any way reduce the way the service that we're providing to other customers. So that is an element of the interim budget change that we'll be presenting today. So with that, that's the status of our work. Happy to answer any questions.
Tim, thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning the importance of additional staffing so that we can continue our level of service to our current customers. I've been hearing from a few folks in the community, like, well, what happens when Micron starts building? Is there going to be, that's going to be a huge demand on a lot of the services, a lot of the service providers. And so I think it's really important to know that the city is doing our part to ensure that we're still able to handle that additional capacity in addition to what we already do for people every day.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. So Tim, previously we've embedded staff at Micron. The new staff you're talking about are going to work here at City Hall in PDS. Are we going to embed any new staff at Micron itself?
Well, the staff that we're adding would be devoted to Micron, so it may be that they would be embedded. I mean,
okay.
We will work in the best way we can. So that could include these positions spending much of their time there.
And just for other council members' information, we did that originally because Micron had some permitting and inspection requirements that really were unique. And so having the staff actually there and as part of the process made it much more efficient for us to get them through the process in a way that met all of our code requirements.
One more question. Tim, can you kind of outline how we're paying for these staff members? Will that be coming out of general fund, or how will that work?
Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, we can speak to the funding of these positions as it relates to the interim budget change, but as Sean mentioned, we've been in discussions with Micron from the beginning about what their fees would be associated with permitting. So we're going to generate a substantial amount of revenue through permitting in association with the Micron work. So something I try to remind everybody of, PDS is a revenue generating department, and that will be the case here.
Madam Mayor.
Just a question, Tim, about that dedicated employee or staff members. Is that just for the completion of the project, or is that something that will be in place, that will be ongoing?
Well, it's going to be years that we'll have to have people likely embedded. The only reason I'm hesitating on the embedded thing is we have changed since Micron investments of this scale happened previously. We now have electronic plan submittal and a lot of things that are done online that were not at that time. Now, the inspectors, of course, have to be there because they're inspecting construction as it's happening. But so this will be a multi-year commitment and responsibility, and we're certainly expecting during this time, and we're seeing, as you can tell by our numbers, that even though we've got some uncertainty in the market as it relates to real estate, we're still seeing more significant investments, especially in large scale multifamily and mixed use developments continuing in the city. We are seeing some softening of the single family, but big scale stuff will continue. So we see this as a long-term commitment of the city to keep people moving.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question for Tim. Tim, I need some clarity. So will the permitting from Micron cover the entire cost of the new employees, or will the city have to help in those costs?
Well, someone else probably should speak to the budget side of things, but I'll say my suspicion is that the revenue we generate will exceed the costs that we have here as it relates to staff by potentially a significant amount.
And Madam Mayor, members of the council, maybe this is a good time to transition into what we expect to be forthcoming, which I think will help answer Council Member Willett's questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Great. So as Sean referenced, and then Tim also referenced, there are many details that we are still working through with the company. And there are lots of mutual considerations that we are trying to figure out and get into formal agreements that will come back before the council as to the specifics on the funding particularly related to the fees. Is it better to do, team members that are working on this project kind of tracking their time and billing by the hour, or are we better off to use a percentage of a fee based on valuation minus the equipment? So as we have said, we feel like we have more questions than we have answers at this point on some of the very detailed specifics, because we want to make sure to document those in agreements and bring those back before. But I think it is very, very, very safe to say that the anticipated revenues from this project will easily cover the cost of these additional resources. The exact mechanics of the how behind the scenes will come back to you in some agreements. And so to put a finer point on that, we have outlined a couple of agreements that we know we need to work closely with Micron to develop. One of those is the facility development agreement, which specifically relates to the water renewal. And we anticipate having that back before council within 60 days. And then we have an overarching funding agreement that will follow that. That will be related to some of the project definition work that Public Works and Micron will be embarking on with our consultant partners, Brown and Caldwell. And we anticipate that agreement being back before council within 3 to 4 months. So that is where the actual detail will be found, is in those agreements. And because this is such a large and ambitious project, we have been working as quickly as we can to get as many of those lined out, but also trying not to wait and hold up really critical project milestones and timelines with getting every last detail ironed out. Is like, we've got to make a first step. And so today is the representation of our first step with then formal agreements and many more details to follow. Did that help? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So then I wanted to touch just a little bit on, Sean had referenced there are many, many people across the city working on this. So I wanted to just kind of drive home the program structure that the city has established and we have found to be really helpful. Romeo Gervais, who is our assistant fire chief, but on loan to us for this project, and I are leading the efforts here and maintaining kind of the single point of contact for Micron leadership as we move through this. And then we have about 6 work streams that we are tracking underneath this. We have a schedule of, I think it's 5 ongoing weekly check-in meetings between city and Micron staff on the various different work streams. So those include the PDS permitting piece, the recycled water piece, as Sean referenced, some of our plans for the broader housing and transportation. So all of these are moving in parallel to make sure that we are, the city is prepared and structured and ready to meet this really ambitious project and very ambitious timeline that Micron has set. So that seems to be working well, kind of several weeks into that cadence and structure. And I anticipate that we will be back before you, in another 45 to 60 days with the first of those agreements. And then I anticipate we'll probably be wanting to do like maybe a quarterly check-in on this because it's big and it's moving fast at this outset. I'm guessing within 3 to 6 months that will kind of settle and then we'll be on a very predictable cadence. But we might want a couple of check-ins in the near term more frequently as we get everything settled and sorted.
Or do we have, Romeo, are you covering anything?
No, we have Romeo and Mary on standby depending on the question. So
No.
Is there further? We need to wait on a budget piece. So if anybody has anything that you would like to say, please do.
Madam Mayor, I don't have a question, just a comment. I just want to commend everyone for the work that's been done. I know that government can sometimes move a little bit slower than business. And I know that you all have been diligent in the speed in which you're responding to things while still being cognizant of the resources that we have and the service that we usually provide to our citizens, making sure that that's still maintained. I also really appreciate the cognizance around where the funding is coming from for various portions of this project. I think that that's really important to keep in mind as we're moving through it, because this is a big project. It has elements of economic development. It's going to benefit our citizens with great paying jobs. It's going to benefit the city for years to come. And so I think that there's a lot to consider there when we think about what we're putting in, what Micron's putting into our community, and there's a lot of give and take there. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that I've seen displayed from staff and from the mayor's office as we move through this. And that's it. I don't have any questions. I know that you guys are doing a great job. I know that Romeo is going to be making sure that this place is super safe for all the employees, even though we don't usually build clean rooms. Like, this is a newish thing. And I know that Tim's staff is going to be doing very much the same thing, making sure that these are safe structurally and safe for the workers. So thanks. That's all I wanted to say.
Madam Mayor, this is a pretty exciting project. Romeo, it's great to have you on this project. A lot of faith in you and the work that you've done here at the city. I've got a couple of just like real broad questions, and I kind of feel bad for how broad they are. And Sean, maybe you can speak to this. But you talked about there was other supporting sort of discussions and initiatives that we need to be thinking about moving forward when it came to housing, when it came to VRT. Are there discussions that we need to kind of have on our radar that we need to be thinking about pushing and moving forward and being proactive with that support the other aspects, childcare facility that's going in next door, other types of things along those lines?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton. So thank you for bringing up the childcare facility. That, as I understand, is underway. I know that Tim's team is working at I don't know exactly which stage the project is at this very moment, but I know that it's well on its way to being completed. And that's certainly a critical piece of this overall project, just ensuring that we have the infrastructure. The childcare is a broad ranging infrastructure type that goes, well into economic development and other critical needs of our community. So yes, that's something that's almost, as far as I know, almost on its way to completion. On the transportation and housing piece, I think most critically, this is a time to work collaboratively with our partner agencies, specifically Valley Regional Transit, to as well as with the company, to best understand the needs of the workforce and what will be most effective in terms of providing meaningful transit opportunities for the growing workforce, not just for Micron, but for employers across our city. So it's certainly an opportunity to take a closer look at that, and something that the company made very clear was a priority for them. So yes, I'd say that now is the time to look forward to closer collaboration and making sure that our city is focused on what will be most meaningful in that regard. On the housing piece, I wanted to broadly speak to that because it was something that the company also made clear as a foremost priority for ensuring that their workforce is able to have alternatives and housing options that are near to where they work. So that it's part and parcel with the transportation piece and transit, ensuring that those options are available across our city. But with the understanding that we have the regulatory and policy tools at our disposal to set the table for the private sector to move ahead with the resources at their disposal to create new housing in our community and be creative and intentional about that.
Yep. Thanks, Sean. And Madam Mayor, just
Councilmember Halliburton.
Yeah.
If I could address that as well, just to make sure that everyone understands, we have very high expectations about how this investment in our city, which is, as the mayor has said, is generational, can further our goals as it relates to transportation and housing. And Councilmember Mayor, we're engaged in these big conversations about how do we solve these intractable problems that cities have had so much trouble with. Mm-hmm. And so our expectation certainly is that working with Micron and others, we will determine how this investment can further the discussion we're already having about solving the housing problem, which is one that we have to solve by looking within, not outside the city, and addressing transportation such that as many people as possible are not in single vehicles driving to and from work. So we have very specific expectations, as you know, with regard to how the physical shape of the city should be curated, and expect this should further the goals we're discussing with the community. I just don't want it to ever be thought that this is a conversation outside the one we're already having with the community about these issues.
Yeah, perfect. And Madam Mayor, just to kind of follow up on there real quick, and it don't need an answer here. I think the work that our Public Works Department is doing right now, and the need that we might have to push our finger on the accelerator button just a little bit, in some of those areas. When we do get to the point where we have a few more answers and a few more ideas, I think it would be nice to know if there are some areas that, yes, these are our goals for the future, and this is our vision. And also we're going to have to, push a little bit faster in this area to meet the specific need as it's coming online. So those types of things I think would be helpful too. Very exciting.
Well, and I'd say too, just to follow up on that, council member, one of the things that our team did shortly after the announcement was, and Tim referenced this, was pull all the different departments together and walk through the needs as we saw them. And those, of course, included VRT related transit needs, housing needs. There's airport needs eventually. The permitting piece, we don't want current and future customers to run into roadblocks because our staff are working on this large project. So really looking at all of that and making sure that we've got somebody, a point person charged in the organization to make sure that all those pieces are moving along. But I do want to give credit to the council as well. I mean, it was acknowledged in the conversations that we had during this competitive process, that the city had a housing plan. And because the council had approved a housing plan, ways to address affordable housing, that was acknowledged. We were prepared to be able to put our foot on the gas if and when needed. And we also were very clear, and we try to reference this, that we see partnership in this. So it can't all be an expectation of the city, but instead we're going hand in hand to address the needs today and into the future of our community with a key partner, and that is Micron. And whether it be the zoning code rewrite, the work that we're doing on transit that'll need to grow, the growth that we've seen at the airport and the future expansion that we know will be a part of this, and housing, all of that is a conversation that not only will benefit Micron, but truly will benefit this community in partnership with them. And there will be times as we see more of the specific agreements that need to be approved, have more clarity on the action steps that will be taken in the timeline, to also have those other conversations in terms of like the needs in partnership with council, the company, and then other agencies in the region.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was very pleased and moved to see at our dedication for the Irma Hayman House to have members of Micron from their DEI department show up and support our efforts to highlight people like Irma Hayman in our community. And one of the things I appreciate about Micron is that, it's an employer that's going to create opportunities for a diverse workforce to be working in a place where they're welcome, where they're invited to be their authentic selves, and where they're making that effort to make sure that we have folks who may be graduating from Boise State with their engineering degrees and can keep that education and keep that talent here in Boise. And so for that reason, I'm really excited for this project and see how they deeper embed within our diverse community that we have here in Boise.
Well, and with that, did you have something, Council President?
Just real quickly, I just wanted to echo what we've heard from a lot of folks, that really appreciate the fact that the staff and the mayor's office jumped in and began organizing so quickly, so that we can, at least to the extent that we have the power to do so, ensure that this both goes smoothly for Micron and for us, but also doesn't disrupt the rest of the development in the valley. And I think the recognition of that is really important. Quick question for you, Tim, as I've been listening to this and thinking through the sort of policy things that may face us that we might want to think about sooner than later. One is to ensure that as the zoning code rewrite goes ahead, that we really look at that regional communities activity center and understand if we've got it right at this point in what we're proposing, and if we don't, what changes we might need to make. And as we talked about last time you talked to us about the zoning code rewrite, what can we learn from this facility in terms of what we need to do with our industrial zones to make them better? So I think there's a couple of policy things that may come up, and at least this council member is certainly willing to jump in and work on those to the extent we need to move them forward more quickly than we otherwise might.
Great, well, thank you. The next step in this will be the interim budget change. And what we want to do is we wanted to give everybody this context for the changes that you'll see. And Eric will provide an interim budget change document, and then it'll be on the agenda for approval at next week's meeting to give time to review it with the context that you've been provided today. And that'll just be, will it be work session or regular meeting? Regular? It'll be the regular meeting next week. Okay, great. And with that, I want to thank each and every one of you for all that you've done to move us to this point, and look forward to the next conversations we'll be having. And then really looking forward to, I thought about it, kids that are in 6th and 7th grade right now will be graduating from college in year 10 of this program. So think about like 6th and 7th graders that, go to Boise State or elsewhere, get a material science or engineering degree, and then actually will have more opportunity to come home and work and build a career here than they have today. And I think that's pretty cool. So, and each and every one of you on our team that's been working so hard on that has a big part in that. So thank you. With that, we will take a break until noon when we're back for a regular meeting.